Greetings, traveler. My name is Xanthos. I've been working in the games industry for over a decade now, and today we're taking a look at why it is useful to organize game design into phases and what's the simplest way to do that. Let's jump right in. Today we're going to first of all take a look at what's the hard mode of game design. What do most companies do that makes the process complicated? Then we're going to talk about why it is useful to organize game design versus having it as a general collection of ideas. And finally, we're going to take a look at the simplest way to split this process into phases. So starting with the hard mode, what I mean by this is when studios start working on a game and the game director or the game design team has no clear concept or idea about what the game is. There's a lot of ideas and discussions about it. There's perhaps some concept art or some base game that we're working off of, but there is no clear process about how to organize the whole of game design into a coherent process with a beginning and an end. So instead, what most often happens is the team just starts and they say, well, let's just start and let's see what happens. The game will eventually become interesting and it eventually will be complete. That poses a set of problems. First of all, trying to make a game with vague or no plan is a very easy way to get lost with. If you have no clear destination, then you have no way of checking whether you're getting closer or further away from it. Another difficult part of this mentality is that it leads to changes to the core concept of the game very regularly. So today we're working on one version of the game, but then somebody has a cool idea. It's a bit far from the original concept, but it sounds cool. So let's throw that in and let's see what happens. That is a process that can repeat itself infinitely and has no guarantee of getting us where we want to go. Similar to the cool idea is that creating a feature because it's cool. That's not a bad thing necessarily, but it's better if the ideas that are to be implemented into the project have a purpose for being there. If something sounds cool and we implement it and we see that indeed it matches the game and it's fun to have it in, by all means, it's cool to keep it. But adding features to the game just because somebody thinks they sound cool is an easy way, again, to get lost and to perhaps move further away from the goal that we have for the project than closer. If we are in this process where we continuously change things and re-add things and re-evaluate what the game is, then one of the very, very time-consuming parts of the process is going to be having to rebalance all the features of the game with every update. Every new feature has no way of informing itself about what exists in the game already. So when we add to the game, we have to rebalance all the enemies, all the items, all the weapons, all the levels, because this new element was born from nothing. So it has no connection to the game. So when it gets added to the game has to adjust itself to this new item rather than the item serving the game as a whole. And finally, the difficult part of this approach is that you never really know when the game is done. You don't know if you need to add another 5 features or 10 features, or if the game was done 3 features ago and we made it more complicated and less complete by adding a number of new things. So this process has infinite pitfalls. These are just a few, but let's see why it's useful to organize game design rather than having it as a collection of ideas. Well, it prevents us from getting lost in the details. We have discussions based on a certain process rather than if something is cool or not. It helps us shift our focus from someone's opinion to whether it serves the game or not. So oftentimes, like I said before, we do things because someone said it's cool, or because a manager or the CEO of the company or someone offered an opinion of what we should do in the game. So not to say that those are always to be ignored, but the question we must always ask ourselves is, what is the purpose of this new idea or this new feature in the game, or indeed the thing we're working on right now? And does it serve the game as a whole? Does it take us closer to our destination, or does it take us further away? It also provides a guiding star to navigate this process. If all we're going off is ideas that are flying around in the development team, then we don't know which one of these ideas is the core one. And even if you define the style of the game, let's say something like I don't know, a racing game or a Monster Hunter style game, there's still many ways you could approach this topic. So in any case, having a core concept to guide us and a destination to go towards, a guiding star, so to speak, helps us immensely in navigating the very wild and very creative game design process. So I want to introduce to you the concept that I have been using in my work until now. And even though game design is a very deep and very complicated topic, I think it can also be very simple to approach. So no hard manuals, no hard concepts to explain, just a very simple framework that you can use and test and have it serve your work in your everyday life. So this game design process is separated into phases. The first one is the concept stage. Then you have the vision of the game. Then you move on to create the pillars of the game. The pillars then distill themselves into features of the game. And then finally you have to balance all the features that you have implemented in the game to make sure they achieve their purpose. Now, these are the general 5 phases of game design. This only covers game design as in the game rules of the game and the game mechanics. It doesn't cover art or anything else. So this is just to provide a framework to guide the team on how to create this wonderful idea that you have for a game. So in this video, I'll be going over these 5 phases and briefly introducing them. And in the next videos in this podcast, I'll be jumping in and covering more in depth each one of them. So if you have specific questions for any one of these phases, please let me know down below. So let's start with the concept. So what is the game concept? This is the absolute highest level expression of a game idea, right? This is the most general, the most high level, the most open-ended way you can describe the game, but it still has enough information in it to explain to someone what it is you're talking about. The concept of the game is a short phrase that conveys the core experience of the game. So this one phrase has to do all of that. And it has to be a short phrase, otherwise, again, it's easy to get lost in the details. Let's see some examples. You have to daily care for your own pet monster. So this is something for perhaps a Tamagotchi style game, but it very briefly explains what you will be doing in the game. Also, in better examples, you also see why it's interesting. So this could have been a pet dog or a pet cat or something, but having it be a pet monster, it has the extra fun element of having it be something entirely new, because this is a brand new monster that you'll be creating for this game. It makes people wonder, how is this different from caring for a dog or a bird or something else? So not only it fully captures the experience that you will get in the game, it also gives the listener a good idea about why this is also interesting to them. Another example is you roll random objects into a huge ball. Now, this is of course the core concept of the Katamari Damacy games, and it is described here in a very brief manner, and it also gives you this childlike play element in just one very, very short sentence. It makes you think back to the time when you were playing in the kindergarten or in the playground or in the beach, rolling dirt around until it becomes a ball, or maybe with snow. It has that childlike play element to it that's fun to think about. Another example is this game. It's like Mario, but with machine guns. So this is for a game, let's say like Metal Slug, where if you think about Mario, you have essentially the core elements of a platform game, but you add the machine guns part. Now, this essentially gives the image to the listener of the main character using machine guns to advance in the stage rather than just jumping. This is interesting because we all know that Mario basically only uses his jump and mushroom mechanics to get through the stages, and so this can sometimes be frustrating for players, feeling powerless and feeling that, oh, I have to step on an enemy to kill them. If I miscalculate it, they're gonna touch me and they're gonna kill me instead. So having the machine gun approach here gives you the safety that perhaps if I can shoot the enemy first, I don't have to be hit by them physically and die every time like it has happened to us so many times playing Mario. So it also hides this element of excitement and why this is a cool thing to try rather than just another game concept. And another example is this game is like World of Tanks, but with battleships. So again, this is a very easy way to convey a game. It's very clear. If you watch a video World of Tanks, you have a general idea of what that game is like. And then if you simply replace the tanks with battleships, then you have basically a similar gameplay, but in a very different arena, let's say with different players. This is a good way to explain a game because it takes something existing that the listener probably knows of, and then it simply replaces one element. So instead of having tanks, you have battleships. And of course, battleships go on the sea, so you imagine a sea stage rather than a ground stage. Of course, this has the caveat that if the person you're talking to doesn't know the basic game you're talking about, well, then it's more difficult to explain, and then you'll have to find something they do know about. But assuming you go fairly popular games, then there's a higher chance that your listening partner will know exactly what you're talking about. Let's move on to the vision of the game. So the vision of the game simply describes the core theme or feeling of the game. Why do we need this? And why does it come after the concept? Well, the concept describes what the game is. Its setup, its general mechanics, its gameplay style, and so on. The vision instead describes the feeling or the theme you're supposed to be experiencing when you're playing this game. So this has a very emotional part to it, or a very thematic part to it, because the vision is used to convey the design goal we have for this game throughout all the features we create from now on, and of course the game pillars. Some examples are airships equal freedom. This vision tells us that in this game, when we're going to be looking at airships, using airships, riding airships, fighting with airships, they are our vehicle to freedom, and this is what they're supposed to signify. So if the game is about airships, then the purpose of airships in the game is to express the feeling of freedom. So by using them, you manage to escape a constraining situation, or you manage to shift your state from slavery to freedom, or whatever you want to express in the game. This is the core concept that is going to inform everything in the game design sphere that comes after it. Another example is Marcus Phoenix is a badass. Now this is of course from Gears of War, where you'll see that regardless of the style of the game or the concept of the game, which could be just a TPS shooter that looks like so and so, the vision is quite different in the words it uses. It doesn't talk about TPS or so, it doesn't talk about guns, it doesn't talk about war, none of that. Instead, it talks about Marcus Phoenix being a badass. This will inform everything in the game. All the features, all the stages, the animations, the sounds, the dialogue lines that are spoken in the game, they should all support this vision and they should all be connected to it somehow. Everything in the game happens to showcase that. Why is this interesting? Because everybody likes seeing characters who act strong, they act cool. Most movies have this premise. Most books have a cool protagonist. This is something that humans really like. So we feel we identify with the protagonist. We feel sort of joining with the protagonist. So seeing a cool protagonist makes us feel good as well. This is a very human thing. So if the game, as it plays out, it supports Marcus's identity as a badass, we feel cool, we feel good witnessing it. Another example is mega levels of violence. You had better give us that mature rating right now. Now, this is from the original Fallout game, and it definitely sets the tone for what this game is going to be about. It doesn't tell you about the isometric style. It doesn't tell you about the post-apocalyptic world. It doesn't tell you about any of that stuff. What it does tell you is what this game is supposed to mean emotionally for the player. So you'll see how all these three examples have this emotion and theme very well tied into them. So freedom, badass, violence, whatever you choose to put in your game, the vision should signify it as the centerpiece, the center feeling, the center experience or theme of the game, and it makes it much easier to communicate to the team what you want them to create going forward. Also, it's going to inform all creative decisions that come after this, because when you have a creative, let's say, fork, where you could go with one direction or the other, referring back to the game vision helps you choose which choice is the correct one, which one will bring you closer to this vision that you have for the game. And once we have that, we can move on to the game pillars. Now, the game pillars is a fairly commonly used term in the games industry, especially when it comes to game design. What it is basically 3 or 4 must-have elements for the game. Now, already we are in highly subjective territory. There is no one way to define game pillars. There is no rule that says they must be 3 or 4 and they couldn't be 1 or 15,000 or whatever. But this approach of limiting it to that sets the foundations, and that's why they're called pillars. They are the foundations for everything that will follow after that. Just like the concept is basically the foundation for the game that you want to make, and the vision is the foundation for the pillars. The pillars themselves are the foundation for all the elements that will be created later on in the game design process. So some examples of a single pillar are age of sale combat. So what this tells us is that regardless of what vision and what concept you have chosen up to now, you have decided that in order for that vision and that concept to be actualized into the game, you must have combat that reminisces of the age of sail. And by age of sail, we mean the way ships that go on the sea used to fight with each other hundreds of years ago. So ships that used the wind to move around, sails, and used to fight with each other with lots and lots of cannons that they had mounted on their broadside, their long sides, left and right, to shoot at each other out at sea. Now, this combat is very particular. It's very different from World War II combat or, I don't know, futuristic combat or something. So it definitely clearly defines the type of combat we're talking about, and it helps us decide later on what sort of features will support this pillar, or rather are supported by this pillar. Another example is a Victorian world. So again, there is no single representation of this, but instead it gives us some core, some base to work with when we're talking about this. Again, this talks about the world. It doesn't talk about combat. And it's okay to have different types of pillars in your game. So this is about the combat mechanics, perhaps the looks a little bit, but the Victorian world is definitely more focused on the looks of the game and the culture rather than the specific mechanics. Although, of course, there can be mechanics that support a Victorian world as well. So having that as a pillar means that this is very important for the concept of the game and the vision. With this, the concept and the vision of the game become stronger. And that's why you need this absolutely to be so in your game to bring your game idea to life. A last example is real-time multiplayer car racing. So this is very much mechanics related. So this tells us that this game, whatever concept and vision we decided, must have not just car racing, but it must be multiplayer. And of course, it must be real time. So reading just this, we know we're talking about a very action style, possibly quite realistic car racing experience. So we know immediately that this is not just a car racing manager kind of game. It's not turn-based or anything else. It's something very rooted in action, and it gives us a very clear design goal moving forward to the game features. So what is the game features? It's a set of game mechanics and aesthetics that flesh out the game pillars. So all these features that we're going to talk about now are a derivative of the pillars that we set before. So when we're talking about, for example, real-time multiplayer car racing, then that means that one of the features must be this car, essentially. So if you want car racing, you have to have cars in your game. And then you can start thinking about what sorts of elements from cars from the real world you need in your game, you need to model in the game to make sure they deliver the concepts of the game and what's said in the pillars. What does this mean exactly? This means that when you model cars into your game, if you're going for a realistic look, then you need to have, for example, analog throttle controls and analog steering and as much as possible realistic physics. If, on the other hand, you were going for a more playful Mario Kart style of experience, then it's not super important to have absolute realism. A reduced level of realism is fine as long as what you're seeing in the game still kind of resembles a kart. Because for that game, the point would be to have fun and to play around with all these power-ups and to always be competitive with the other players, rather than giving the players a very deep simulation kind of feeling. So let's look at some examples that would stem from the Age of Sail combat pillar. So as we mentioned, Age of Sail means large, essentially wooden ships that move around with wind energy using their sails. So already we have several things to unpack here. This list is definitely not exhaustive, but just by thinking about the wooden ship that moves around with sails concept plus the combat part, so cannons and rifles and so on, we immediately get large ships as a game feature. You would have a hard time expressing an Age of Sail combat system without some large ships actually in the game. And here, just like with the car example, you have to think about how many elements from real-world large wooden ships you would need to model in the game to achieve the level of realism or immersion that you want in your game. Maybe it's very deep, maybe it's not so deep because it's a lighter experience, but that's up to you to decide. But this is one feature that stems directly from the Age of Sail combat pillar, and you can see how it supports it, because you need to have large ships to have this kind of combat experience. Another game feature can be crew management. Again, it doesn't have to be there as a feature, but you can easily see how having a crew on the ship and managing it deepens the immersion of this Age of Sail combat pillar, and it makes the experience of the game more authentic. Similarly, you can have broadside cannons. Again, the way this connects to the Age of Sail combat is, for example, if you had cannons on a ship that were on a turret, so the cannons could aim at any direction at any time, because they're on this turret that turns basically 360 degrees, that's completely fine, but that's a defining characteristic of, let's say, Second World War battleships or later, rather than ships from hundreds of years ago. So it's up to you to decide how you implement this to best support this Age of Sail combat pillar. Inaccurate shooting also is heavily linked with cannons from back in the day. Gunsmoke was an unfortunate side effect of shooting lots of gunpowder-based cannons all at the same time. Seafaring is another one. So in order to get to have this Age of Sail combat out at sea, you first need to get there. And of course, traveling at sea has all sorts of challenges and perils that perhaps you want to model in your game to make the experience more authentic and more realistic. And this brings us to the last phase of the game design process, and that is balancing all the things you put in the game. So the reason why this is separated into its own phase is because this is best done when a certain amount of features is in the game. This process starts slowly, and you will typically need to start doing it as soon as the first features in the game. So as we talked about from Age of Sail combat example, then you have the large ships. That means you need large ships in the game. So as soon as you have them in the game and you can control them and you can play around with them in a gray box prototype, then you can immediately start checking if these really act out their purpose. And this one sentence basically tells you how to perform game balancing on a high level. So if in your game you're supposed to have this large wooden ship that moves around only with the wind, of course it cannot zoom around like a speedboat. It needs to be big and slow to move, slow to turn. So of course you can have mechanics like speeding up time or making it more arcade style, so you don't have to wait a long time for the ship to do all its movements authentically and realistically. But still, you need to make sure that the feature behaves as the pillars dictate, and also as the vision guides you and as the game concept ultimately sets the tone for. So does each feature act out its purpose? Also, is there enough of a difference to set it apart from similar items of its kind? So this question happens a lot in balancing when you have lots of items in the game, lots of characters, lots of power-ups, and so on. So they are all born out of a certain game feature, out of a certain concept, but you need to make sure that they all, again, act out their purpose. Let's look at an example. So let's say that in your game you have iron swords and bone swords and steel swords. Well, if they all did exactly the same damage, it would be difficult for the player to understand why are they all made of different materials. Perhaps they do the same damage, but they have different durabilities. The bone sword, for example, breaks more easily than the iron sword, and so on. Or it could be that materials in your game world have a different meaning. So iron is the weakest one, then perhaps steel is stronger, but bone swords, because they come from dragon bone or something, they are the best there are because they're light and they're durable and so on. So whatever theme you set for your world, whatever description and whatever looks you set for items and characters and so on in your world, they have an unspoken premise about them. They have an assumption and a description about them. So just as soon as somebody reads that description or looks at the graphics, in their mind, based on what they see and what they read, they make assumptions about what this item is supposed to do, what this character is supposed to do, and so on. And so if this character or item or power-up acts in the way that is evident by the appearance and the description, then generally we say that this is pretty well balanced. It's in this case, the iron sword would be stronger than the bone sword, but weaker than the steel sword, if we go by conventional standards. But if in this world the iron sword is the strongest one, and the second strongest is the bone sword, and the weakest of all is the steel sword, you would think, wait a minute, what's going on with this world? I feel like there's something the game is not telling me. So this would make the iron sword feel unbalanced compared to the other two, because it would be strangely overpowered, I suppose. So you can apply this to characters, you can apply this to virtually anything, any single feature that is present in your game, and the features are the result of the pillars we discussed before. So that's it for covering this framework. Of course, this is a very high-level look at this framework, but what it does is it sets each phase in the terms of what needs to be done first and what needs to be done last, and what is expected inside each phase, and it gives you an idea of what elements to implement. So in the following videos, I'll be jumping in and going in more details about each one of these phases, and also I'll be letting you know how to create the concept, the vision, the features, and so on in each phase, so you have a very easy and simple approach about how to make all this, and at least you're not lost about this process when somebody asks you to do it, or when you're doing it for your own game. So that's it for today. Thank you for watching, and as always, have fun.